In the last section, we walked through the k-nearest neighbor algorithm. We're now going to start implementing this thing from scratch, but before we do, I want to do a quick review of a library that you may or may not use before in the JavaScript world. We're going to do a quick review of this library, or maybe just introduce it for the first time, because it's a library that we're going to be using throughout this entire course to do a lot of different operations. We're going to first take a look at the documentation around this library. The library is called Lodash, by the way, and then we'll work through a very quick example just to make sure that you're up to speed with some general ideas behind the library. The Lodash documentation for this library that we're going to be used, can be accessed at lodash.com/docs. So I'll navigate there right now. Now this is a utility JavaScript library. Whether you are using JavaScript on Node.js or you're writing React code or Angular, whatever it might be, Lodash is almost always a very useful library to have around. It has a lot of different methods built into it for working very efficiently with arrays of data or objects or just about anything you can possibly imagine in the world of JavaScript. Like I said, we're going to be using this library quite a bit throughout this course, so I just want to go through one or two very quick examples with you. Now to actually walk through these examples, we're going to use a little tool that I put together. This tool is a coding tool of sorts that allows you to enter in a little bit of code and then very quickly see the output from that code. So you could do this inside of your code editor, but it's going to make life a little bit more challenging to run it. So let's check out this tool very quickly. One thing I want you to know about this link right here is that these JSP letters right there are case sensitive. So when you try to visit this link, make sure you put in capital J, S, and P. All right, so I'll open that page. On the left-hand side is a little code editor, and we can write in some amount of code here, and then reference that variable, and it'll be automatically printed up on the right-hand side. I can then write in some number of expressions, like say divide that number, or multiply it by itself. And the result of each of these different statements will be reflected automatically on the right-hand side. I can then change the original number, and you can see that the output over here on the right-hand side changes as well. So again, this is just a nice little tool to very quickly write a little bit of code and see the output over here. And so in reality, it makes it a very nice tool to use with Lodash because you can test out all these different methods and get an idea of how they work. Now, like I said, I want to very quickly go through one or two quick examples with Lodash. If you've already used Lodash before and you feel pretty confident in how it works, you can of course skip the rest of this section and move on to the next one if you want to. Otherwise, let's go through a quick example. All right, so in this tool, I'm going to put together a little array of arrays with a structure very similar to the data structure that we're going to be working with for all of our data inside all of our data sets in this course. So it's going to be an array of arrays where the inner arrays contain maybe some different numbers that represent some data. And I'll just enter in a couple of dummy values in here. And we'll work around with it just a little bit. Okay, so we can imagine that maybe this is an array of arrays where each inner array or each row represents some observation about some natural event or something that we want to analyze in some way. Now I want to very quickly show you just two very important methods to understand about Lodash as we start going into our k-nearest neighbor algorithm. The first method from the Lodash library that I want you to understand is the sort by method. So if you want to, you could go back over to lodash.com and look up sort by and look at the documentation for it if you want to. But of course, I'll show you an example here very quickly. So with sort by, we can reference Lodash as the underscore. The underscore is a valid JavaScript variable name, so there's nothing special about it being called underscore. It's just what Lodash colloquially is known as. We'll then reference the sort by method and then pass in our array of numbers. Now, as you might guess, this sort by method is used to sort an array. Sort by is very special because we can pass in a second argument as a function, and that function will be called with every element in this array. So in this case, it'll be called first with this array, then this one, and this one. The purpose of this second argument, or this function, is to allow or to give the sort by method some criteria to use to sort all the elements in this outer array right here. So in our case, maybe we want to sort this array by the second index in here. So if we sort it by the second index, I would expect to see from least to greatest. So the first entry should be -5, then 1, then 2, then 5. So let's try writing in a function that will provide the second element in each of these arrays. to use as a sorting variable. So I'll put in a little function here that will be called with each individual row. And then I will return row at 1, like so. So that's telling sort by that we want to sort the numbers array using the second element in each of these little arrays as our sorting criteria. And you can see over here that we got our correctly sorted array from least to greatest. We have -5, 1, 2, and then 5. Now, one thing that you might be interested in is a little refactor to this sort by function right here. You'll notice I'm using the classic ES5 anonymous function syntax. I could very easily shorten this syntax to use an arrow function instead. So to do so, I would remove the function keyword. I would put an arrow on the other side, remove the parentheses around row, remove that curly brace and the curly brace down below, and then remove the return keyword and the semicolon at the very end. And so I end up with just that, like so. And that is completely identical to the code that you saw just a moment ago. Okay, so that's simple enough. Now I want to take that sorted array, and I'm going to save it to a variable that I'm going to call sorted. Now I want to show you one other very quick Lodash function, and then you'll see why I'm really walking through this example here, because there's one very critical example that I want you to see at the very end. So I now want to try to map over all these records, or this sorted list of records right here. And I want to extract just the second index, or the second element, from all these inner arrays. So to do so, I'm going to map over the output of sorted right there. And then I'm going to again provide a function that will be called with every individual row inside the numbers list. And this time around, I'm going to return the second element like so. So now I've written a map function that's going to extract just the second element from each one of these inner arrays. And I end up with -5, 1, 2, and 5, like so. Now maybe I would assign that to a new variable that I'll call mapped like so. Now I want to pivot just a little bit now, and I want to tell you about a very important feature of Lodash that we're going to use quite a bit as we start going into this k-nearest neighbor algorithm. One thing that you'll start to notice with this pattern right here is that we've kind of got like a variable name, and then dot some function, and then we pass in the result of whatever we called the previous variable. So notice how we had numbers, passed in numbers and called that sorted, and then sorted went into map, got assigned to mapped, and then maybe if we wanted to add in more functions down below, we would take mapped and add it into the next function. So this is a lot of very repetitive code. Lodash has a built-in function to help us very easily clean all this stuff up. So I want to very quickly show it to you. This is the really important part of this section. If you go back over to the Lodash documentation, you can look up another method called chain. Chain allows us to very quickly chain on, so to speak, multiple different Lodash functions. And so we can use it to write some very clean and concise looking code. Let's take a look at a very quick example. To use chain, we'll call _.chain, and then we'll pass in our original numbers array. And now onto this call, we can chain on as many different Lodash functions as we want to. So for example, I could now call sort by, like so. When we start to use chain, the key thing is that we don't have to manually pass in these arrays to every additional function that we want to add in. When we use chain, our numbers array is kind of implicitly passed as the first argument to sort by for us. So all we have to do is pass in whatever we had used as the second argument previously as the first argument this time around. So I'll put in row is row at 1. And then to then map over that array and extract that second column in there, I could then chain on a .map and say again row at 1, like so. And then when I'm all done with my chain of all these different methods, I can then finally put on a .value like so. The .value is going to stop the chain and eventually return the value or the end result of all this computation. And so you can see over here, we still have our -5, 1, 2, and 5, just as we did before. Okay, so I know that this whole Lodash thing was a little bit of a diversion, but again, it's something that we're going to be using quite a bit throughout this course, mostly for manipulating all of our different data sets. So let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to use this chain functionality to put together our k-nearest neighbor algorithm in a surprisingly concise little bit of code. So quick pause and I'll see you in just a minute.